precious blood. Why is interposition necessary? Because it is a gift and a command of God. We're told not to live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. If we think we don't need this doctrine, the doctrine is presented throughout the Scriptures. We will miss the protection of God if we abandon this doctrine. Any coincidence that we are not under the protection of God? Any coincidence that we not only are exposed here, but that we don't know this doctrine? Any coincidence? Or is there a connection? Maybe. Another question, do we have leftover or residual evidence of this doctrine in our country today? And I argue the evidence is literally everywhere, from state charters and government, to county to local officials, from federal law officers to state and local sheriffs and law officers, to an independent judiciary and the jury system, to the existence and persons of pastors, fathers, and mothers. Why would you even have a separation of powers? Think about this for a minute. Think about this. Throughout our entire system, we have all these different layers of protection. Supposed to be protection anyway. Why would you even have that if you didn't believe in interposition to begin with? Let's ask this question in a different way. If we, the Church of Jesus Christ today, were creating a country, how would we do it? Would we even think of the separation of powers? Would we even think of interposition as a necessary thing? We have interposition built into every fabric of our civil society. It is just literally everywhere. Independent judiciary. Why do you have an independent judiciary? Why? Because people abuse power. Why do you have local officials versus state officials? Why? Because people abuse power. And make no mistake, power divorced from Christianity is always bloody and tyrannical. Always. Always. This is an exclusively Christian doctrine, my friends. Don't look to Hinduism, certainly not Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, ancestor worship, communism, socialism, whatever. Don't look to any of those isms for this particular doctrine. You're only going to really find it one place. Count one place. It is a specific biblical doctrine. And speaking of the office of sheriff, Thomas Jefferson wrote in The Value of Constitutions that there is no honorable law enforcement authority in Anglo-American law so ancient as that of the county sheriff, whose role as a peace officer goes back at least to the time of Alfred the Great. You see what Thomas Jefferson called sheriffs. In 1994, Sheriff Richard Mack, some of you remember this, stood up to the federal government and filed a lawsuit to stop the Brady Bill that was signed into law by President Clinton. 6 other sheriffs from around the country joined the lawsuit. Okay, what a joke, right? I mean, that's not even worth laughing at. Sheriff Richard Mack, who's he, joined with 6 other sheriffs out of hundreds and hundreds throughout the country, are going to stand up and sue the federal government over the Brady Bill.
That was only one of 6 bills.
You're right. On June 27, 1997, the Supreme Court ruled that the Brady Bill was in fact unconstitutional and that the federal government could not commandeer state or county offices for federal bidding. Justice Scalia wrote for the majority stating the federal government may not compel the states to enact or enforce a federal regulatory program. And from Sheriff Richard Mack, in his book, The County Sheriff, America's Last Hope, and think about this. If we are to get America back, if we are indeed to return to the constitutional republic that we were meant to be, then it will be up to us, the sheriffs of America, who have the guts and dedication to tell the feds that we will no longer tolerate their intervention, control, meddling, mandates, or criminal behavior. I hate to say it, but there There is a civil authority who has a lot more courage than an awful lot of our ecclesiastical authorities. Now, maybe you're here tonight, you don't think he's telling the truth. Maybe you think he's overstating the case. Let's see. Intervention, control, meddling, mandates, criminal behavior. Nah. Is interposition a command or merely an option? Clearly, this doctrine is embedded at the core of our most basic institution, marriage. Think about this. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. You know how Paul defines a husband? He defines a husband here as an interposing husband. You ever think about that? This doctrine is everywhere. Some final questions. Is it possible that this doctrine could come from any source other than a Christian source? Is this really a neglected doctrine in our day? If so, why? I think we've established that it is a neglected doctrine, but why? What would that be? Ezekiel 22:30. God calls it out in stark relief. And I sought for a man among them that should make up the hedge and stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it. But I found none. God's saying, I looked. I was looking. I was aggressively trying to find somebody. I couldn't do it. There was nobody. Finally, would we, as a North American body of churchgoers, even recognize a deliverer, interposer, if one came along? What would we say? How would we react? We know that the children of Israel missed their opportunity with Moses the first time. What about us? In 2010, Sheriff Brad Rogers in Elkhart County, Indiana, had a dilemma on his hands. He found out that a local farmer, an Amish farmer by the name of Hostetler, was about to be invaded by agents from the Food and Drug Administration. His crime? He sold, whatever the word is, unregistered raw milk. Of course, the charge was that the milk was tainted. There had been an investigation, and the farmer, Hostetler, his milk was not connected with any tainted milk. None. Of course, that meant then that the USDA agents weren't going to come bother Mr. Hostetler anymore, right? They were coming anyway. You know what Sheriff Rogers did? He sent him a letter. He said, if you show up without a warrant from a local judge, it better be a local judge. If you show up without a warrant from a local judge, then I or my deputies will arrest you.
Problems.
There's a man who understood imposition. By the way, you know what happened? The USDA, after sending him many threatening letters, backed off. Backed off completely. And never did bother Mr. Hostetler. See, Sheriff Rogers took his duty seriously. His duty is not to lay over and play dead while these federal agents come and bother someone in his jurisdiction. His duty is to protect. Protect he did. Let us never forget. The built-in layers of protection in any godly society are there for exactly that, protection. However, if those charged with the duty of protection will not protect, they will either become practically useless, that's the best option, or worse, join hands with the tyrants and become instruments of oppression. See, that's the only possibility ever for a civil magistrate, isn't it? You either protect or you oppress. There's no third way. You know, we have all these layers out there now. And we have the state supposedly protecting us, but you know what? It's like almost like the better to tax you, my dear. You know, it's like all these different layers, they are all lining up to oppress us rather than protect us from the oppressors. That's the problem with the separation of powers, isn't it? The separation of powers, they don't protect anymore. Now you have more powers to come down on them. Thank you for your kind attention tonight. I hope we certainly understood, or certainly made clear the doctrine of interposition, why it's necessary, and how it's impossible to fix much of anything without it. And, you know, one of the reasons why we really had to talk about this tonight was there are people who are not in the Christian tradition that don't really believe the Bible. Some of them have a lot of decent sounding ideas about how to fix things, I suppose. I guess I can say it that way. But you know what? Without this doctrine, without this understanding, I don't know how far you're going to get. It wasn't that and there's just one last discussion point before we take questions. We're getting in this inane, kind of odd discussion nowadays in some circles about whether or not the colonists were correct. Have any of you gotten that, you know, they really were maybe wrong to rebel against King George, and they shouldn't have done that. But don't forget that the colonists weren't on their own. They didn't do this in a vacuum. They did it with the support of an awful lot of intermediate civil magistrates here in America. That's why they had a Congress. That's why they wrote the Declaration, to set their reasons before the world so the world would understand. Not only that, one more, we cannot have a discussion like this without speaking of Oliver Cromwell. Another man who understood interposition, really understood it, to the point that even if it was the king, even the king wasn't going to get away with abusing, with criminal behavior his subjects. And Oliver stood up on behalf of his subjects, the king's subjects, yes. Not only that, and here's something for you to think about. But while Oliver Cromwell was Lord Protector of England, news came to him that the French king, I always forget which one it is. I mean, after King Louis VII, they all sound the same, right? Was it King Louis VII, 8th, 9th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, or 16th? Who knows? One of the Louis was turning on the Reformed Protestants, Huguenots, there in France. Now here's a question for you. What's a godly civil magistrate to do with the means at his disposal? Oliver Cromwell could have easily said, well, you know what? I am not going to meddle in the internal affairs of another sovereign country. Let's go have a prayer for those people who are being killed, being driven from their homes in the middle of winter, by the way. And it was horrible. It was a Holocaust. It was awful. Oliver Cromwell took interposition so seriously that he wrote a note, shall we say, to the King of France. Sent it by way of the ambassador. The note was written by John Milton. If you ever get a chance to read it, all I can think of is, and I've had a chance to read it, I don't have it with me here tonight, but if you can ever think of like an iron fist and a velvet glove, he told the king, I really think it would be in your best interest to stop what you're doing and replace these people with their property and set them at the same liberties that they had before. I just really think you ought to do that. You know what the King of France did? You know what? I should have thought of that before. And he stopped just because of the threat. The threat, yes, it was a threat, of a godly civil magistrate, Oliver Cromwell. Not only that, but one of the books by a man named D'Aubigné, a French Huguenot, actually gave, he wrote of Cromwell years later, actually gave Cromwell credit for saving the life of his family. He actually said, you know, I don't think I'd be alive because France at that time was intent on wiping out the Protestants. I come from a family who was saved by Oliver Cromwell's edict, if you will, his directive to the King of France. A man who really, a godly man, who took their position seriously. And I don't see how you can even be a civil magistrate and say you're godly if you don't understand and believe this doctrine. And I think we've gone a little bit longer than normal tonight, but I just want to thank you for your kind attention and hope it will be fun.